Hi, boys and girls. Today we are learning a new target skill called drawing conclusions for our new story, Prudy's Problem and How She Solved It. So before we begin our lesson, I need you to go get your reading textbooks and turn to page 270, 271. You will also need a scrap piece of paper and a pencil. So go ahead and get all of those items. Okay, so today we are learning drawing conclusions. What does that mean? What does drawing conclusions mean? Well, boys and girls, when we draw conclusions, us readers can use story clues to try to figure out what the author didn't say within the story. A lot of times, boys and girls, the author is not going to provide us with every single piece of information. They want us to make conclusions about what they're talking about. A lot of times we can use context clues within the story. We can use our prior knowledge. What that means is it's the knowledge that we already know. So for instance, if you look at my poster, it says the author told me the smart animal was eating bananas. Well, it didn't tell us what animal they were talking about. But if I use my prior knowledge, information I already know, and some of the clues that the author told us, then I should be able to figure out what animal the author is trying to talk to me about. Well, the animal eats bananas. It's smart. When I think of an animal eating bananas, I think of a monkey. So you can make a conclusion that the author is talking about a monkey. Another thing is making inferences. So I can put making inferences and drawing conclusions. I like to look at them in the same category. When we make inferences, it's when we use what we know, prior knowledge, and what the author said to figure out what the author didn't say. Again, that's just drawing conclusions. So making inferences and drawing conclusions mean the same thing. So you can make connections from what you already know in the story or to the story. Okay, so let's look at page 270. It gives us a little bit more information about drawing conclusions. If you look at our first bullet point, it says a conclusion is a decision or an opinion that makes sense based on facts and details. So if you're reading a story, boys and girls, you draw conclusions based on what the author has already told you. Also, based on what you already know. Remember, we call that prior knowledge. Prior knowledge is information that we already know. The details and facts you read and what you already know will help you draw conclusions about the text. So, when I'm reading a story, I always think it's important while we read that we're asking questions. Well, if I'm reading a story about certain characters, I want to say, well, who is this character? What are they doing? What is happening? Why is this happening? So good readers always ask themselves questions as they read. So what we're going to do, boys and girls, is we are going to read the story collecting stamps. So as we read the story collecting stamps, I want you to find some facts and information, some details that we can pull out to help us make a conclusion. So help us draw a conclusion so we can make an inference about this story. Okay, so let's start with paragraph 1. It says, collecting stamps is a fun and interesting hobby. Sometimes children and young people are interested in collecting stamps, but they might not have a lot of money to buy stamps. How can you get stamps without spending money? Let's stop there and talk for a minute, okay? Now, I read that children enjoy collecting stamps, but they might not have money to buy them. And then in the last sentence, it talks about how you can get stamps without spending money. So right then and there, I can draw a conclusion about what the rest of my story will possibly be about. What do you think the rest of my story is going to be about? If we're talking about how collecting stamps is fun and interesting, sometimes children and young people are interested in it, but they might not have a lot of money to buy stamps. And then the last question says, how can you get stamps without spending money? Well, what do you think the story is going to be about? Make a conclusion. Draw a conclusion based on what we've just read. What do you think? Well, if it's asking me, how can you get stamps without spending money? Right there, a light bulb went off in my head. I already started thinking about different ways that I could get stamps without spending any money. Did you start thinking that too when a question was asked? Yeah, so I can make a conclusion that this story is probably going to be about how we can find stamps without even having to spend 1 penny. Let's figure that out. There are a few ways you can solve that problem. One way is to ask people to give you stamps that they don't need. Start by telling your friends and your family that you are collecting stamps. Suppose your uncle gets a letter from France. He can save the stamp and give it to you. Another way to get stamps is to trade them with other people. Once you start collecting, you might get more than 1 copy of the same stamp. Then you can use the copies to trade with other people for stamps that you don't have. Asking people to save stamps for you and trading stamps are 2 good ways to get stamps. Before you know it, you'll have more stamps than you can count. So boys and girls, after reading the entire passage, was our conclusion correct? Did they tell us ways how we can get stamps without spending money? Absolutely. They gave us a few ways on how to get stamps without spending money. When we first talked about this question, and I said a light bulb went off in my head, and I already started thinking about the different ways that I could get stamps. Were any of the ways that they described ways that you were already thinking of? Awesome. Did you think of any other ways that we could get stamps? I sure did. One of the ways is in mail. Every day we get mail in our mailboxes. You could just cut out the stamp and start saving them. That was another way that I thought of. So drawing conclusions is using clues from the story and activating your prior knowledge, information you already know, to help solve the problem or to help figure out the answer. So what we're going to do, boys and girls, is I want you to get out your scrap piece of paper if you have, or if you have this paper, get this paper out. But if you don't, that's okay. What I would like you to do is just go ahead and draw 2 boxes, 2 squares, and then a rectangle at the bottom. So if you have a blank piece of scrap paper, go ahead and draw your 2 squares and then a rectangle at the bottom so it looks like my copy. So we're going to write facts or details that we found in our story that will give us a conclusion. So we need to figure out what conclusion can we draw about collecting stamps. Make sure you have evidence from the story to support your conclusion. Boys and girls, evidence means facts, true facts. I need to find evidence from my story so I can have my conclusion. That helps support my conclusion. That will tell me if my conclusion is correct or not. So, what kind of facts and details would you say we saw in our story or heard on our story? What do you think? What do you think one detail is about collecting stamps? What did we learn about how we can collect stamps? Well, go back to your story. What is a way that we found that we can collect stamps, boys and girls? What did they tell us? I know they gave us several ways. Go back to your story and find those ways. I even see one way is to ask people to give you stamps that they don't need. Well, that's a great way. So let's write that as our fact. We can ask people to give you stamps that they don't need. We just provided evidence from the story about one of the ways that they described on how we can get stamps. Simply ask people to give you stamps that they don't need. Many people, when they get their stamps, maybe on their envelopes, they just throw them in the trash anyways. So that would be a great detail to add. Did you figure out another fact or detail? What is another way we can provide evidence to come up with our conclusion? What other way did they say? Did you find it? Yeah, we can get more by trading them with other people. So we can get stamps by trading with other people. So let's write trade stamps with other people. That's another great way to get stamps. Now, are those the only 2 ways to get stamps? Absolutely not. There's several ways that we can find and figure out how to get stamps. But those are 2 ways that they gave us in our story. So even if you have another way, that's great. But when we provide evidence, we need to make sure we pull that evidence from the story that we're reading. Now, let's draw our conclusion. What can we say about collecting stamps? When we ask different people to give us stamps that they don't need, when we trade stamps with other people, what does that say about the collection of stamps that we're going to get? What conclusion can you draw about collecting stamps? Think about that. Well, a conclusion that I think is important is that when we find different ways to get stamps, to collect them, we're going to get a whole bunch of different types of stamps. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So my conclusion is finding different ways to collect stamps will get you different types of stamps and can be fun. So that's the conclusion that we're going to write, boys and girls. So go ahead and write finding different ways, because that's what we need. We need to find different ways to get our stamp collection started. To collect stamps will get you different types of stamps and can be a lot of fun. If you look, boys and girls, if I would go to the post office and I would say, can I buy a roll of stamps? I can pick from several different designs, believe it or not. They have the American flag, they might have a picture of a flower, they might have another type of picture. So I'm able to choose the type of stamp that I want. So it'd be kind of cool when we if you would collect stamps, to see how many different type of stamps you could collect. So boys and girls, what we did is we made a conclusion. By the evidence from the story, we figured out different ways that we could collect stamps. And we know that when we collect stamps from our different ways, that we're going to collect stamps, all different types of stamps. And it is going to be a lot of fun to look at those different types of stamps. And plus, you'll have a collection. So boys and girls, that's drawing conclusions. Remember, when you draw conclusions, use story clues to figure out what the author is trying to tell you. Use your prior knowledge. Use the knowledge that you already know to figure out what the author is trying to tell you. So make sure when you read that next story, when you read your next book, you're asking yourself those questions. Who are the characters in this story? Why would they do this? Or what's really happening in the story? Good readers always ask themselves questions while they read. That way they comprehend the story better. You did a fantastic job today. Good job.